Welcome to the Startup Grind.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our friend, Duke Chung.
Thank you. Woo. Hello. Is that me or somebody else?
Got some Parature
Fans
here.
Yeah.
Maybe Cornell's fans here. Well, thank you for coming out, Duke. Actually, I was very excited about this particular interview. Duke is actually, he's what I call one of the connectors here in DC. Such a big hustler. Everybody talks about him, so I'm so glad we have you here. So we always like to start out our interview on a personal note. So let's go way back. Where were you born? Where were you raised? What did your parents do? And then maybe talk about your first entrepreneur experience as a child. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, first off, it's great to be here. And I'm surprised so many of you guys came out to come hear the story. So I feel very honored. I grew up here in this area, not far. I grew up in Maryland. Went to Churchill. So I don't know if any of you guys are local. I'm sure a bunch of you guys are. I went to Churchill, in fact, as I mentioned. My parents both worked for the government growing up. My mom still works for HUD today, and my dad was at NIST. So, as you can imagine, growing up, it was pretty rigorous, just from a conservative basis. You know, do your homework, get your stuff done, try to get to a good school, all the stuff you'd expect. I ended up going to Cornell for undergrad into engineering. I don't think we have a lot of choice. Being sort of Asian American, I don't want to stereotype engineering or, you know, I probably don't want to go there.
It's just one, engineering.
Yeah, so. That's right. I'll speak for Brian too. So I went to Cornell for engineering. That's sort of how I got into this whole ecosystem of tech, not knowing what to expect, but I happened to be in school during the dot-com time. So it was a very interesting period, as some of you guys may remember. Probably most of you guys don't, but I'm sure some of you guys remember that time frame. I would say when I was in school, in our engineering class, by 1999, 2000, maybe a third to a half the school quit school, and they all left to go join startups. In fact, in our college town in Ithaca, all the old pizza shops, storefronts, all turned into startups because there was so much money going into funding companies. And then a big portion of my class went to the Bay Area, of course, and ended up coming back much later when the economy went down. But being in that environment really opened our eyes up, and I think that was probably the biggest catalyst in understanding what the opportunities were around tech, not knowing that. It was actually, to be honest, more of a learning curve for me than going to school. It was just actually being in that environment. And you know, we would be doing homework, and then half the time we'd be talking about ideas, what to do. So that kind of drew us into that environment, and that takes us to Cornell.
So before Cornell, did you have like a lemonade stand or like, you know, lawn service? Like, did you have, you know?
Yeah, we always thought about, you only know so much growing up, right? Those are experiences that you go through. Where I grew up in Potomac, we had Avenel had golf, you know, every year. It was really popular. Some of you guys probably know about that. So when we were younger, we'd always go set up a little lemonade shop there on the street, try to make a little money. And there's, you know, the people that go to these golf events are actually pretty rich. So you could charge twice for your lemonade. And we learned like location is really important. You know, if you're going to set up a lemonade stand, set it up in Avenel instead of, you know, somewhere else, maybe in DC, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I wanted to go back to Cornell because I think that what you are talking about with Cornell is very important. Did you think Cornell was very important to your entrepreneurial journey? And had you gone to another school, do you think it would have been different? Like, would you be an entrepreneur?
I think about that sometimes. You know, I think it was a coincidence on what was happening in the market at the time. At the same time, the ecosystem of the people that you hang out with, you know, everybody's talking about tech and everybody's immersed in technology. So I think that makes a big difference. When I look at like 1776, you know, there's this grouping of people that have common interests, and naturally, you know, your discussions, you know, tend to go certain paths. So, you know, maybe if you went to Carnegie Mellon, or you went to Carnegie Mellon, Brian, so I probably may have entered, you know, the same type of path, perhaps.
Well, the thing is about Carnegie Mellon, we didn't have coffee shops that turned into co-working
Maybe
spaces.
not.
That's why I was asking about this with Cornell, because I think it's that they
Kind of
engender
unique
that
that
kind
way.
of entrepreneurial spirit there.
Yep. And in fact, and I know part of this, as we move forward in the story, it's, a lot of this was, our early days was hanging out with Blackboard guys. And I know you talked to Tim here before and Michael Chasen. So Tim and Dan and a few others, Lee Wang, who a lot of them, as many guys may have seen, are involved in WeddingWire today. They were about 4 years ahead of us at Cornell. And so when we were freshmen, they were seniors. And we hung out with them all the time. So as an example of hanging out with people that were doing tech.
This is a great segue because this is I always ask, okay, let's talk about the beginning days of Parature, okay? So it's a good segue here. What was sort of the aha moments when you started Parature? And I understand like this whole connection with Blackboard, which is very important. So let's go way in the beginning. Like, how did that all happen?
So, when we were in school, we would hang out with a lot of tech people, and Blackboard was just one example that sort of led us to our first idea. As many of you know, Blackboard is in the online education space. And Tim and Dan and Lee, they were focused on building really great education software, selling to Cornell and other schools. In fact, I think at the time they had maybe 7 or 8 schools, not a lot, but they had a product. And we learned a lot by hanging out with them. And our first idea actually came around on the university around building a sort of a collaborative chat platform. And what we saw at the university that was different than the rest of the world was back in 2000, 2001, 80% of the world was on dial-up, like AOL. You dial up every night and go online. But in the university environment, we were on Ethernet. So we actually never knew what dial-up was until I went home and I saw what my parents were doing. And I was like, wow, I can't believe we're doing that, because I might as well just go back to school, right? Everything's super fast. Now, of course, we didn't have Wi-Fi back then, so you'd have to plug everything into your dorm. But we had these jacks, and there'd be like wires everywhere in our dorms. But we loved it, and the computers weren't like today, right? They were like towers. And the monitors are huge. It takes 2 people to move a monitor. So our dorms would be, most of our furniture was actually computers. Besides your bed, you'd have massive monitors and towers running, and we would be plugged in the whole time. And this is where actually we sort of realized, wow, maybe the world was moving towards faster internet. And while AOL was offering technologies like AOL IM, which was slower, but required you to download something locally, we thought, if on a campus, there's no reason, those problems didn't exist. So we built what we thought was really cool, was a completely web-based chat product that didn't require any local downloads. So when you're at school, you wanted to chat with your friends across the campus, and you wanted a way to collaborate with them. This was a really quick way to do it. You just go to a website, and you can get a list of all your friends. And it was blazing fast because on the campus. Of course, when you go home, it would never work because it was just way too slow. But this gave us a little bit of insight. And I called this sort of back then. I called this real-time quotes versus delayed quotes in stock trading. It's like you could see things sort of 15 minutes ahead. We felt like we could see things maybe 1 or 2 years ahead. And eventually, internet caught up and got really fast, right? Like today we take it for granted, but back then, it was a big problem out there.
So I mean, how you had described it before was like sort of ICQ for web, right?
That's right.
Well, they had something called IRC, which was like chat.
Yes.
And then ICQ sort of.
That dates me though, Brian. You must be a lot older than I am.
Inside joke, guys. Okay, you don't have to laugh. So the thing is, I just kind of looking at the beginning days of Parature, like, I sort of like, because the thing is that like there's so many startups out there, right? And then how come it's like you're the one, right? Like how come you're the startup that gets bought out by eventually Microsoft, right? And so I was looking at the beginning days, and so I figured that the friends with Blackboard founders, that was very key, right? Right. Okay. And then number 2 was the capital efficiency, where you were in the dorms and you're using Cornell's network, right?
Resources, right.
Resources, right. And then number 3 had this thing, creative hacking, which is your database, right? Where was it Microsoft database, by the way?
Of course it was Microsoft.
Okay, Microsoft database. which is kind of interesting because you learned how to hack around the licenses because it's $25,000 for a database license. That's right. And you had multiple database.
That's right. It's a good point. Yeah, let me share that story. So, when we started building our software, we needed one database. And actually, in fact, it was Microsoft because we did a survey with my co-founders and we basically said, back then there wasn't all the stuff today, right, that's available, open source stuff. Back then it was either Java or like with Oracle or go with Microsoft. And to be honest, we didn't really know. We just picked one or two. So we just did a survey, and there was one more hand for Microsoft. So we just said, all right, we're going to go for Microsoft. And so it was brutally expensive to buy a database, and we pulled all our money together and bought one database. And then we started building the software. And then we said, if we're going to team up with Blackboard to sell this thing, there's no way we're going to be able to afford to get another license because it was that expensive. It was like 20-some thousand, I think back then, like $20-some thousand to get one database. So then we said, all right, how are we going to make this database work? So we tried to stretch this database out so we could fit as many customers as we could on one database to try to share that cost. So we took one database and partitioned it out and re-engineered it so we could fit, say, 100 or 200 customers on there, and so that we could share that cost structure. Now we did it that way because of the cost reasons, but what we found later on was this was a huge advantage for us because we found all of our competitors who were really rich, who actually raised a ton of money, never tackled this problem. They just said, all right, we had all this money from VCs, let's just buy another database and deploy it. And so for us, not realizing that was such an advantage for us to be cost sensitive early on, it really helped us differentiate our product. We had one database that could scale. When we got another 200 customers, we'd set up another database, another 200 customers. So for the same amount of business our competitors would do, we could run it on 6 or 7 databases. And our competitors who had 1,000 customers would have 1,000 database licenses running at the same time.
I mean, so that's the same sort of concept of what startups are doing now. They're sort of using the AWS in the cloud.
Right.
So they have a lot more leverage for the money. They can stretch the dollars a lot more. The other component I wanted to say was you had no marketing. It was complete word of mouth. And by the time you got out of the chat to go into, now we'll talk about your pivoting, you had 300 to 400 customers, SMB customers, right? Then you had to pivot to this new thing. Was it like self-service customer service, right?
Yeah.
So tell us about that.
Yeah.
Like, how did you find out to pivot into that away from the whole chat?
So we built a chat software, as I mentioned, with Blackboard. So our thinking there was all we understood was the university environment. We knew how to sell to a school, but we could only grow as fast as Blackboard, and it took a long time. To be honest, like Blackboard was trying to get their traction going. They weren't funded, and they hadn't met Michael yet down here, so they hadn't merged their companies together. So one of my co-founders in the summer 2001 said, Duke, if we're going to build this chat thing, why don't we just put it online and see if anybody else could use it? So we kind of debated, and this was actually over beer, and we just sat there and said, all right, fine. So we set up a website that night, and this is back in, I think, around sort of springtime in 2001. We set up a simple website that said, hey, if you ever need chat software that requires no download, you can sign up for it. It's free. Just come here, put in your information, we'll give you some code, and you can get up and running with chat. And so we ran this for 3 months, and by August in 2001, we had about 300-400 companies sign up for this, and we were totally surprised because we were in our dorm, and remember, like back, I don't know, I think Cornell now. Some of you guys are Cornell. Now there's air conditioning. It's actually pretty nice. Back when I was in school, there's no air conditioning, right? So we had your parents would give these fans, and we'd put them on the windowsill. And it turns out in the summertime, it actually gets quite hot in Ithaca, believe it or not. So we took the fans and actually started blowing it at our computers because we stacked up all of our computers as our servers in our dorm room, and it was running through the whole summer. And the reason why was because there was a lot of activity on there, and what we found was that these small companies actually were using our chat and putting it on their website because they were all chasing the dreams of Amazon and eBay. They were a small shop, in a small town, but no one had ever heard of them. And what they were using our chat for was they were trying to convert their customers because they didn't really trust their brands at the time. People didn't really trust buying things online. Unlike today, you'll probably go to the store and touch it first and then go online and buy it. But 10 years ago, no one really trusted buying anything online. There's credit card fraud. Is the website going to be there again? So they would do all their research online and then go buy it in the store. So what these companies were using our chat for was they were actually they called it humanizing the experience. If you actually went to a website you'd never heard of before, you could use a chat, and there would be a real person there that actually would help you answer your question. So they were using our software for that, and we were totally surprised. This was not the school environment. This was actually customer service people licensing our software. Now again, it was all free, so we didn't charge anything for it, but we could see the traction of small businesses signing up, and they were just finding us online on search engines. And back then it wasn't even Google. See, back then it was Yahoo, Alta Vista, there's Lycos, all these brands that, many of them don't even exist today.
Yeah, yep. Here, you can have my water. Here, go ahead. You want to drink a little bit? So I'll try to make this question a little longer. Paradigm of the future. Okay, so I want to switch gears here a little bit. You guys understand what his company does? It's basically customer service. They pivoted to customer service from chat. So I wanted to talk about this whole paradigm shift. So, Parature is the name is that, paradigm of the future, Parature. You had talked about in the past, I was looking at some of your past videos, and you had talked about like riding the wave of a platform change. Obviously, you guys lived up to your words, riding the wave on a platform change. What was the platform change to Parature?
Yep.
What was it?
So before we go there, I just want to talk about the paradigm of the future. So our name Parature does come from paradigm of the future. And what I learned in the early days is that because of the pivoting, we moved from the university market to customer service. What we found was that we're always sort of discovering. And so we didn't want to pick a name that was so focused or tailored to one industry. So that's how we got paradigm of the future, because who knew what we were going to do 10 years later, right? It could be a completely different industry. So we just had this vision that we wanted to build a brand with a good brand, with a name. And so that's how we got that name around paradigm in the future. But specifically around platforms, we found the opportunities we saw were really around whenever an emerging platform would happen, we thought that was a really unique opportunity for us to market. And I never knew that would be the case. So take, for example, back in 2001, had the internet really taken off the way it did, we were so early as a Google AdWord advertiser. In fact, I think we were in the top 100 companies that ever advertised on Google. Nobody advertised for the word customer service software when we started. And so we went to Google and we realized that all these people were searching for customer service software. So we said, oh, this has got to be like a billboard. Like if you're driving down a highway, you just want to have your billboard up. If you're a restaurant, you just want people to stop in the next stop, right? So all these people are already looking for customer service software. We wanted to make sure we were there. And nobody was advertising. So for the first, I would say, 3 to 6 months, we were the only advertiser there that showed up with an ad. And I call that a platform change for marketing because nobody was doing it, but we were kind of looking ahead and seeing that this was a really unique way because nobody was doing it and we could differentiate and stand out. When you look down towards all these platforms that have changed, like social, and I'll take Twitter for example, and you guys probably heard the story like Zappos. So when we talked to Tony, Tony was so early in adopting and embracing Twitter, even before many people jumped on it. And he built his personality and really focused on honing in, customer service around Zappos and built that whole brand on Twitter. But that was when Twitter was just taking off. And after it took off, of course, everyone knew about it, right? But every time there are these opportunities where there's a platform change, I feel like it's a really good opportunity for companies to really explore that, to see if it's a way to, build the awareness for your company out there.
Okay, so that's great. That was great what you just said there. So, the platform change with Parature was the internet, the internet. But then, here's some startups right here in this room. I mean, they grew up with the internet. That's not a platform change for them. They grew up with that technology. What is the new platform? What is that platform? Is it, is it the YouTube? Is it Pinterest? What is it?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I think if you go to the Bay Area now, and now social is actually kind of old now, right? And everyone knows what social is. And I think even in social, there's some emerging platforms that could be interesting. I think a lot of people are looking at like Snapchat. Could that be a new platform? People are obviously looking at Pinterest, which is relatively newer, but is gaining a lot of traction. I think if you look a little bit further on, there's a lot of bets right now in virtual reality. Could virtual reality be actually the next platform change? So, as you think about your business, and as we think about our business, we look at those avenues as channels where your next customer could be, and the goal is to get there early so you can really build your awareness. And it applies to every industry. So we happen to be in the customer service business, right? But if you look like Google AdWord platform, it serves every market of advertisers, and now they're at scale. And I think it's for a company to really develop their business to gain that awareness out there, you just have to be really creative on watching where these platforms change.
That's really interesting. I wanted to talk more of this whole YouTube craze. So there's this girl, Michelle Phan. She was a YouTube celebrity, and then I believe a startup approached her and said, "Hey, would you like to partner up and be a co-found this company called Epsi?" And so she basically, like you said, this whole new platform, using that as a marketing vehicle.
That's right.
Now, like 3 years later, they're booking $9 million.
Amazing.
Companies. So
amazing. And I think YouTube's a good example right now. I was 2 weeks ago. I was in New York, and when you walk down the streets, you see YouTube billboards up of personalities, and people are building franchises on YouTube. And who would have thought, even 10 years ago, YouTube, which was just emerging, would become this amazing platform for people to really build personalities and build a $9-10 million business, alone, right?
So I wanted to let's go back to when you pivot from chat to customer service. The whole customer support in the whole knowledge base is a crowded market, right? I mean, when you guys were, I understand you're following your customers, but then they're leading you down to the 800-pound gorilla, and now it's like, whoa, now how do we differentiate ourselves? So what was your differentiator for Parature when you decided to go with this market?
when we went to the 300 to 400 early small customers that brought us into the customer service space, we had no idea what this customer service industry was. We just came out of college, and people asked me, were you a customer service rep? And I definitely wasn't, because I had no idea what goes on in a contact center. But what we saw were these trends that were happening and how we would prefer to be a customer being served on the internet. So we saw the internet early, that's of course in 2001, as that first channel to get in to selling our software, and our buyers were all customer service buyers. And the knowledge base actually was pretty interesting, because not many people were doing knowledge base at the time. And the idea we didn't come up with the idea, our customers came up with the idea. We went to our customers, we went to all of them that were using our chat, and we said, we sat down with them and we said, what else could we do to make your jobs easier? And almost all of them came back to us and said, this is 2001, right, where people are actually using the internet then more, I would say, as sort of a fad. They put their kids to sleep and they dial up online and try to do some shopping. But it wasn't as popular as today, where people are just using it in the office. So these retail companies would come to us and say, well, to be honest, every morning when our agents come in, it takes them 2 hours to get through all their email. There's all these questions that happen overnight. And most companies staff agents from 9 to 5, and that's when they use our chat. But after 5 or 6 p.m., they all go home. So there's actually no customer service being provided. So all these questions come in because there's no agents. Next morning, company opens up and all these agents sit in email, and it takes 2-3 hours to answer emails. So they said, can you help us solve that problem? And we said, how would you solve that problem? They said, well, it's really simple. 80% of our questions are repetitive. I forgot my password, how to return something. They're really simple. We just want a way to put that online so that when our customers come at night and there's no agent, there's an easy way for them to find their own answers. So we said, that's a knowledge base. So we'll take all your answers that you're answering on chat and then let you publish it really easily to the web, and then give you a lot of statistics around what people are clicking on. And now you have an online 24/7 self-service system. And so we built this with the customers, and it was an immediate hit because it took their volume of questions down almost 60-70% from a self-service deflection perspective. And these customers, they don't want to wait, right? They don't want to. People hate waiting. People already hate waiting for the phone. Like when you pick up a phone, you call an 800 number, and you sit there for like 30, maybe 30 minutes, and you're just listening to music. Email, you might wait for a couple days, and people don't know what's going to happen. But people really just want to find their answers fast. So going online and finding your answers right away happened to be the solution. So that took us into the knowledge base, and that was all discovery and based on what the customers were telling us at the time.
And I think the other thing that you guys were you revolutionized the whole customer support with this one feature you did, which was sort of the Fedex tracking number, right? Were you guys the first ones to do that?
I don't know if we would take credit for the first, but we're one of the earliest customers to do this.
Okay,
yeah,
got it.
And so this was the next progression of the knowledge base, which was, we found, and we came coming back to the Blackboard story. So we came back to Blackboard, and Blackboard became our customer, and so they were using our knowledge base and they were using our chat. And we said, how do you track all these issues every day? And Blackboard Michael would come to me and say, well, we're using something called Remedy. It's a really old school sort of case management system. And that's the system where if you call into a contact center today, all the agents use that system to track your issue to make sure they know how to follow up with you. And it's all on your computer. So none of it's exposed to the internet. So we said, how much is that system cost? And Blackboard said something like, it's $250,000. And our software is like selling for $5,000. So we're like, okay, we're in the wrong business because we got to get into that thing. That's $250,000. But the truth was, at $250,000 to get a system, enterprise system like that, most of the mid-market and SMBs couldn't afford a system, to do that. And so most companies out there would start by using maybe Excel or Outlook to do email support because they just can't afford to buy a system like that. So what we did is we went back and said, all right, let's take the case management system, let's bring it to our markets, which at the time were really small businesses, because that's where our customers were, and mid-market companies. But let's do a twist to it. Let's do a twist because our experience was in the web. So let's expose the forms online so that when your customers, if they can't find their information and there's no agents available, go ahead and file your question right on your website. And when you filed it, what we found was that in generally about 30 to 40% of customer service issues when you call in are related to the same issues. They just want to know, you just want to know what the status of your issue is because no one's gotten back to you. So we created this Fedex tracking concept, which was when you filed your question online, we would give you a tracking number. And you can log in anytime online to see where your issue was. If it gets escalated to somebody or it's being read by a different group, you can just see that yourself online. So that again reduced about 30% of all the future phone calls, all the future emails that were coming in, and really helped drive down that volume of support. And this was all based on what we could see. And again, none of us that come from the customer service business, but this was sort of what we felt like should happen out there. And so we built this, and this became our third product. So after the chat and the knowledge base, we built this online case management system.
Okay, I wanted to touch upon what you just said that was really interesting, where you said you went from small business and you moved up to the mid-sized, large enterprises. So just really quick, I want to ask anyone, startups in this room, how many of you sell to large enterprises? Raise your hand. Okay. How many of you are in small business? Raise your hand. Okay. So here's the question. And I always get this all the time. I work out the AOL Fishbowl, and there are startups that go in there and say, oh, we're a startup. We are first marketing to the large businesses, right? We're going to big data, large businesses, right? You guys started with small biz, the SMB, and then you moved up, and then somebody's selling for $250,000. Oh man, we got to go in there. What is your opinion about that? Like, and I kind of see that like, does a startup need to have sort of market credibility going into the small business and then move up? Or can they just go straight into large enterprises and sell that? What's your opinion?
I think, so we started in the small business and not having any experience in business before, what we found was that it was particularly hard to sell to large businesses from day one, only because, look, no one ever heard of Parature before. And you're selling to an enterprise company where, a lot of the parts of the decision-making process is this going to be a sustainable and reliable system? We didn't have the brand, we didn't have the credibility, so naturally it was pretty hard. But I think the bigger issue for a startup is that, are you able to wait 6 to 12 months to get a contract? Every day counts, right? And you may not be making a lot of money, or you may not even be, you might not even have any funding at all to survive that long. So the way I look at it is, you start with the small businesses because small businesses can make decisions pretty quickly. So you use them as a way to really refine your product, and you get some cash flow coming in. And you learn from that. And I think the harder challenge isn't really picking between small and large. The harder challenge is once you have some success around small businesses, do you stay in the small business market or do you just move upstream from there? I think that becomes a harder decision to make because you're seeing some success. When you look at the SMB market, and there's tens of millions of small businesses out there. There's some great companies out there, like Intuit, I would say is a great company out there that just serves small businesses, and they can be $1 billion business, right? And there are companies now that only focus on the enterprise. When you look at like even 10 miles from here, let's say even as a defense contractor, you may get large contracts from the government, and they can build a great business on that. The harder part is actually deciding who you are, what you want to be, and focusing on that.
But how did you guys make that transition? Because now you guys have 500 clients. That's what, when you get to SMB, that's what you started with 500. They're much larger, right? So how did you make that transition?
So for us, everything was discovery for us. So once we got to the small businesses, we started to hire our own sales team. And so at some point, when you get all these inbound small businesses, it's fine. you have a good beachhead. We're maybe $3-4 million business, fairly, not extremely profitable, but I would say self-sustainable. And then you hire these sales reps that come in, and sales reps naturally want to make more money. So they start calling mid-market companies for us. And so we started to sell to a couple of mid-market companies. And they would buy and use the same software that we sold to the small businesses, but they would pay us twice as much. So after about 6 months, we went back and said, holy cow, maybe this is just about positioning. Back to the lemonade stand story, it's about where you set up shop. So we just said, hey, maybe we should serve medium-sized businesses, because now we have, we can sustain the small business market, but maybe moving up and focusing on mid-market, we could make twice as much money with maybe half as much amount of work. But again, we wouldn't have been able to do that unless we had already had some credibility going into it, and we had a way to sustain ourselves. And that's how we started to go into mid-market. And then we just kept going. So at the end of Parature's business, we were getting into the enterprise markets, getting into the government markets where our contracts were, went from maybe $5,000, $10,000 a year to $1 million a year. And I'll tell you, the $1 million a year contract was a lot of work, but it wasn't that much more work than maybe not a 5,000, but a mid-market company which was paying us like a $25,000 contract. $25,000 a million is a big difference, So you could, for one large contract, you'd have to close like 40 mid-market deals.
That makes sense. I mean, you only have so much time.
Right.
Might as well go for the big apples. Hashtag start grind at Paraduke.
Paraduke. Yes.
Okay. So we're gonna get into more fun topics here. Let's talk about fundraising. I'm gonna get right to. I'm gonna go for the jugular here of fundraising. What is the secret of getting funding from Accel Partners? I mean, because Accel Partners, that's one of the top VCs, and when I hear a DC company startup that gets funding from the big boys there in the West Coast, there's got to be something like. What is the secret? How did you guys do that? How did you pull it off?
Well, first off, thank you, Brian. A lot of kudos there. Now looking back, maybe it's cooler than we thought. For us, as I'm sure many of you guys are in the seat, you just need the money, right? So who cares where it comes from? But for us, we raised money from Accel a little bit later. So we had all this. We had a lot of years behind us. I would say we established ourselves around some credibility. We had built up a good base of customers. We were really differentiating ourselves in the space. But really, when Accel came to us, it was really interesting. We met Accel at a conference that I was speaking at, and at the front row, like an event like this, was one of the Accel partners. And he came up to me, and he was like waiting in line with his business card. And he basically said, hey, are you looking to raise money? And we had already raised our Series A from Valhalla and Sierra. That was a $13.5 million round. So this is going into our B round. And we weren't really thinking about raising money because we're still deploying our Series A investments. But he was so persistent. And and I asked him why, and he said, at Accel we found that a lot of our portfolio companies were using Parature. And I said, oh, that's interesting, because I hadn't looked into it. As I went to their website, and I looked at all their portfolio companies. And I think at the time Accel had, it was back in 2008, maybe 60 or 70 active portfolio companies, and close to a third of them were using Parature. I didn't realize that. I just looked through all the logos, and I said, wow, these are all of our customers. And so what they were hearing from their founders and CEOs of these companies was that, they're at a certain stage, they're deploying customer service software, and a lot of Parature is being discussed. And so that sort of gave us a credibility instantly, and led to Accel being fairly aggressive in wanting to invest in our business.
So in case you guys know, Accel is the one, their claim to fame is Facebook. So every time you have a VC that invests in Facebook, they're investing you, everybody pays attention. So, but again, I just wanted to kind of recant this. I think one of the secrets that I've always and that I always hear is the whole pattern recognition. But if you're founder referred, that's great. And that's how the Accel found you guys, because 1/3, again, you said portfolio companies found you.
Right.
And so it was, and what's amazing about it was this is completely inbound.
Right.
You guys weren't even going out looking trying to go out.
We were fortunate.
You were fortunate. That's amazing, right?
We were fortunate. And coming back to that, I think our whole story throughout the years was focus on building a great business, and certain things happen that you don't really predict. Even our seed financing, from Ching-Ho, who's our first angel investor, was Blackboard's first angel investor. And so, hanging out with Blackboard, with them being one of our early largest customers, we earned great credibility. So when Michael Chasen came and said, hey, if you guys are looking to raise money, you should talk to Ching-Ho. And that's how that happened. Same thing, right? It was a portfolio company using Parature, and that led us to an investor conversation. And same with Accel, so portfolio companies.
No, then we'll talk about Microsoft. Oh, by the way, was inbound, right? It's amazing. So I guess the moral of the story is build a product that can stand on its own legs, because everything else will follow. I mean, you guys are probably one of the best products out there.
Right. And that's the advice I would give when people ask me about fundraising. I know fundraising is daunting, and most entrepreneurs today, it's sort of an expectation. I need to go out and find financing. When we started in 2001, and I was 22 coming out of college, I asked Ching-Ho, I said, give me some advice around fundraising. You know, how is it that all these people are getting money and we can't get funded? And the advice that he gave me still sticks with me today. And he said, you're doing it all wrong. And I said, what do you mean? He said, focus on building a great business first, and all the VCs will come and call you. And I looked at him, I said, are you serious? There's no way that would happen, right? It's like, you gotta be joking. But lo and behold, that's what happened. So we just focus on building a great business, focus on delivering a great value proposition, a great product, and great things happened. You just started getting all these calls coming in, and people wanted to invest in our business.
So here's a very important question. So we had interviewed Joe Payne of Eloqua, and they got acquired by Oracle for about $1 billion. One of the questions I asked him was this whole thing, and actually this topic is a very hot topic for DC, and here, because if you look at the interviews at Valley in New York, everybody here always talks about culture, and everybody knows that once you get bought out by a Microsoft or Oracle, it's going to do a cultural change. So how, let's be honest here, how did it change Parature's culture? Because Parature culture, I mean, you guys have like a gong like thing for your salespeople. You got like, you got some crazy stuff in your company, and then when Microsoft bought you out, are they still there? I mean, is it?
Well, the gong is still there.
Okay.
Right. And I'm still at Microsoft, just for the record, of
Sure.
course, right? So when Microsoft approached us, it was really important for us, as Brian mentioned here, the culture was really important for us because we wanted to make sure that there was continuity of our culture, and so much of our success and the days that we enjoyed was the culture we built. And I think it's so important, and a lot of people overestimate the culture for a company. Where it really comes in is, most people think companies are just, sort of rocket ship to the top. The culture really kicks in when things go down, and the only thing that is going to hold your company together is your culture, because you're going through rough patches, and startups always go through rough patches, and I think culture ultimately is what holds people together. So that investment is worth every penny to invest in that, and culture was really important for us, so we wanted to make sure there's continuity. So when Microsoft approached us, we spent 6 months with their team to make sure that the team there was a good cultural fit with our team. And we also looked at 3 or 4 other companies that approached us at around the same time to decide who we wanted to sell to. And I would say, lo and behold, of all, we didn't have any specific expectation going into it. But when we looked at all the teams that would acquire our business, culture was one of the important factors. I mean, the money at the end was obviously important, probably more so for our investors. But for me, and my co-founders, the culture was actually really important. And so I think Microsoft's team stood out the best from a cultural fit. Now, it's a year into it, and 90-some, I think close to 95% of our employees are still at Microsoft today, which is remarkable. When you think of an acquisition, and I don't remember Eloqua's story, but it's usually a lot less, because you go in and it's just such a huge culture shock, going from a small company, 100 people, to 100,000 people company, where we're just a little small division of the team, right? And so I think it takes 2 sides to make it work. Microsoft overinvested and make sure that our team was really comfortable coming in, and then continue to invest. So, for example, we had sort of Class B, Class C offices down in Herndon. They moved us into Microsoft Reston office onto the 6th floor, built us new office space, as a new company coming in, made us feel really hospitable through the whole process, made sure our employees were happy, made sure they took care of everybody. And so for the reasons I wanted to stay with Microsoft, I wanted to watch this through and make sure that our employees were all being taken care of.
What's like the funnest thing you guys do at Parature? I mean, you had told me this story about like the gong, and then like the tenants in the other floor were like, "Who the hell are these people?" Like they keep on hitting that gong. I mean, what's going on?
Well, so some things have changed, of course, right? So we used to hit a gong every time we win a deal, and so if a deal hits a certain size, the gongs get louder and louder. In some cases, I think we got a noise complaint a few times because the company that was below us actually reported us to the building manager and said, at the end of the quarter, it's like all this noise upstairs. Can you tell them to keep it down? Because in Class B space, walls are actually pretty thin, right? So everyone hears it. But that was the culture we had. I mean, we had our users conference in Las Vegas every year, which was really exciting. Our customers loved that. So of course, coming to a large company, we have expectations that some things will change and become more corporate. Unfortunately, we don't do the gong as much anymore. But we have other ways to celebrate the wins right out there, and it was sort of the Microsoft way of doing it. But we're happy to be a part of the team. It's been very fun.
We're running out of time here. We'll open up this in Q&A just a moment, but let's do a little shift here because we always like to ask this questions about entrepreneurs. You're an entrepreneur. Tell us about your biggest failure and how you recovered from it. I know I didn't mention that to you. So
yeah, there's always, first off, I'm not really I'm usually the type of person, as you could basically tell, I'm usually a pretty positive person, right? So anything that happens in the past, things happen, I usually try to look past it and move on, use it to make better decisions, right? We look at Parature, I mean, there's some things that maybe we should have done earlier. For example, we waited 5 years to raise money. And in that time, in a technology business, time is valuable. So, a lot of the debates now looking back with my co-founders is, should we have raised money a little earlier? Because we, took a lot of time to just build this up organically on our cash flow. And it takes a long time, as you guys all know. Every dollar comes in, you got to reinvest it. It just takes that much longer to hire another person. Had we raised money earlier, maybe this would have been, a faster story. That's possible. In 2008, I think one of the biggest challenges we had in Parature's history was the economy coming down. And as you guys all remember, in the beginning of the story, as I mentioned, a lot of SMBs were using our businesses. So we saw probably 30 to 40% of our customer base disappear during that period of time. And we're in a subscription-based business. So as our customers were struggling, they were reducing licenses. We had, I think, about 5 or 10 companies got acquired by Google, for example. And usually when you get acquired by a large company, there's some end of life for service for us. So it was actually very difficult for us because we're trying to maintain the revenue, but it's sort of, the bottom is dropping out, and you're not able to build the top line as fast, right? And so you gotta really course correct. And those were difficult times for us because then we have to either reduce our staff or trim to make sure our business is sustainable. And I always joke about that. I never done that before. Cost cutting is actually, when you think about an entrepreneur, usually positive, right? It's like one of the reasons you start a business is you might not want to get laid off in another company, so you go start a business so you don't get laid off. We're in a situation here now we had to reduce our staff, and it was actually really difficult for me to do that because you have all these people that have joined you in the worst days, gone with you, through all the hardships, and now you're in a situation where you got to let them go, right? After 5, 6 years, it's not that easy. Those were probably the darkest moments during that period of time, where I would just sit up all night, and basically think about. It was like 8 a.m. We're going to announce the cost cutting, and you just sit there all morning for the sunrise, and then you got to go in and tell. And it's not. I mean, that part, telling the news isn't that hard. It's everything that happens after that, right? It's like, oh my God, the ceiling is falling, right? And everyone starts looking for a job. So then you start losing your best people in the company. And it's fairly difficult once you're in that path. It's sort of hard to course correct, right? Unless the economy picks up or something great happens. But I think now, having gone through this story, and been through it, now we know what to expect if we ever have to do it again, maybe here or some other business. You learn through that, and there's ups and downs. But going through it for the first time, as an entrepreneur, I'm sure all of you guys are thinking about building your own products. You might not be thinking about one day you're going to have to reduce your staff down significantly, right? Those are issues that come up. Those are the tough decisions you have to make as the founders of the businesses. And these people that have believed and been with you on this journey for 5, 6 years, they may not be there in 7 years. Not because you don't want them to, it's just because you've got to do what's best for your business.
So I want to leave a little bit more time for Q&A, but one last question. So you've already had the acquisition by Microsoft. So there's quite some dry powder out there, right? So what sort of startups that looks interesting to you, right? I mean, this is why I bring folks like you out here, because after a big successful exit, there's, like I said, there's entrepreneurs would want to contribute back to the ecosystem. So what sort of startups sort of tickle your fancy? What's interesting to you out there right now?
I like, I'm looking at a lot of data companies. I think, we're in this age now, and I know big data has been thrown around and analytics is big, but I think we're in this interesting time period now with devices, where devices creates a lot of data, social creates a lot of data. So we have actually more data now than we've ever had before. And we started the business, one database can handle 200 customers. Now you need a much larger database to handle the same amount of customers just because of the amount of data that's being accumulated. Every social post, every text message from your phone creates enormous amounts of data, which becomes extremely valuable. For example, one thing I learned about data recently is when a plane takes off and lands, there's something like 5 or 10 terabytes of data that occurs. Just in that flight alone, of all the sensors that happen in a plane ride. So imagine that's just one flight. And that's probably not even like a cross-country flight. So it gives you an idea of how important data can be. And I think for us, what we learned in customer service was that data, the companies that understand their data can use the data to make better decisions for their business moving forward. And it's the companies that actually don't look at their data that actually fall behind because they become too reactionary. But if you want to be strategic, looking at the data, understanding the data becomes interesting. And now with all these devices and social and whatever's next, there's only going to be more data out there. So I think data becomes really interesting. So I think there's certain companies like locally here, I know Fiscal Note is one that we talked about that's doing really well, aggregating a lot of data from the government, from an analytics perspective. So I do like that. I tend to also like companies that, a lot of people think you need to build a new business in a new space that's really different or that's unique. I often think that, in large spaces of industries, like take for example travel or even in CRM or let's say retail, there are opportunities to disrupt these existing markets with newer technology. So a lot of people think that you have to create something really new. When you look at like Facebook's business, I think there were several people before Facebook, right? I think MySpace was one. But if you can do it better, faster, cheaper, then it creates an opportunity for you. And those tend to be more successful companies, in my opinion, because the market's already large enough out there. And what you're doing is you're creating some innovation in an existing market. So I like businesses like that where there's a large market opportunity in front of you and you have a new way of solving the problem, some problem in that industry. And of course, I think behind that, the things I look for usually as I do a little bit of investing is the team. I think the team is really important. And a lot of people ask me about fundraising, and I think ultimately my secret sauce is really 3 things. One is find a business that's in a really large market. Number 2, make sure you build a really good team. And oftentimes in order to attract a really good team, you probably, in today's age more so than even 10 years ago, you really need to raise capital to attract that team because really good people out there that you want to bring on, they have so many choices. And why would they come join your startup versus another startup? And capital does have that advantage. You can afford to bring them over and you can assemble a really good team. So I think, when you look at these 3 areas, a big market, having a great team, and having the ability to bring the capital in to attract that team to help you fulfill that vision, and keep on iterating that same business model as you grow your business, then it should get you to a relatively good position where you have options on whether you want to take it public or maybe you sell it to a company like Microsoft.
Okay, I think we have time for maybe 2 or 3 questions. So before we open it up, any City Pass member, VIP, have any questions? You sure, Jeff? There's the only one here. All right, so anybody have any questions? Okay, let's start with you. Here we go. Can you stand up?
Hi there. Thanks very much, Duke. My name's Conrad, also a Cornell alum.
Nice to meet you.
Likewise. And going back to that note, you spoke a number of points, and one of them I was wondering as well, what about mentors? And specifically linking it back to Cornell, whether entrepreneurship at Cornell or other tasks or other services that Cornell has are offering that to you or to other people, if you're finding that a good niche, and if not, or if so, where else do you find good mentors? Thanks.
I think it's a really good idea to find a mentor. It's not always that natural to find a mentor. In my experience, Ching-Ho, who's our first angel investor, had sold his company before, had gotten involved in companies like Blackboard, and was really a great mentor for us. And the mentors take you through their experiences to a certain level. Then when our first investor came in, they were great mentors for us. And when Accel came in, they helped us in that phase of the business, and they served as our mentors. I think it's always great to go out and seek mentors. I know sometimes it's hard to spend the time to do that, and it's not always natural because you may not want to specifically seek out a specific person to be a mentor. Sometimes they happen just coincidentally, and I would say there's in a startup you want two mentors. One, someone who's perhaps gone down the journey before, who could advise you, on building a business, for example. Then you have mentors in certain industries. So in our space, in customer service, we try to find mentors in customer service that could help us really think about our vision around the product. And every business is different, right? So you obviously want to find someone who help you in your industry. And there are certain people in those areas that you may want to think about meeting at some point. I think it's always a great idea to have a mentor, and it's a good way to just soundboard your ideas with someone who has seen it before, so you can minimize risk. So much of building a business, I think, is reducing your risk. It's already so much risk, right? So anything you can do, any advice you can do to minimize your risk will increase your overall chance of success.
Okay, we have time for one question left. There you go.
My name is Jennifer Robinette. I'm actually Carnegie Mellon alumni. So, all right. So my question is around partnership. So when you're starting, the partners are super important. So how do you kind of find the right partners and then keep them? And if you lose one or two along the way, what's the best way to find them?
Well, partners is I'll put it in the category of distribution. In enterprise software, there's a few ways to sell, right? You can sell direct. You can sell on the web alone, self-service. You can sell direct through a sales team, or you can sell through partners. Partners usually are a little bit, in my experience, tend to be more favorable a little later on. So, for example, in Parature's business, we actually didn't have too many partners because we had our own sales team. But now, being a part of Microsoft for the last year, Microsoft brought 600,000 partners to sell our product. So we almost went from 5 or 10 partners to 600,000 partners that now can sell our products. So you can think about the distribution, right? But it's very symbiotic. A partner is not going to spend time if they don't think they can make money selling your product. So you, like this SMB concept, you need to start the engine a little bit to show some success, and then be able to showcase the value to the partner so that they will want to invest the time to learn about your product and sell it. I think once you prove some success around partners, and it's about the relationship and what they get out of it. If they can make money reselling your products, then you should be able to maintain that relationship, unless something, of course, happens to their own business, right? But assuming everything's fine, it shouldn't be a problem. I would diversify pretty quickly. So if you find a partner in a certain area, you may want to find 2 or 3 more. If that's your sole source of revenue, I would make that top of mind, right? You don't want to rely on one partner all the time to be able to do so. And it may mean you need to spend a little bit more time out there to research, who are the ideal partners you would want to sell your products or to partner with you to get to market. Reduce risk, again, for your business in case, something happens out there. But I'm a big fan of partners. I think partners, what I learned in the last year at Microsoft is a partner can help you scale your business very fast. So, they're fully incentivized because they also want to make money. So if you have a good product that works, and you can introduce, you can find a way so that your partner can also make some of the money, then it's a much faster way at a lower cost to scale your business. Your alternative is to go raise a lot of venture financing and to build a sales team, which is very expensive. But if you can do it with partners, then you may be able to do it without having to raise a lot of money, which means you may own more of your business in the long term.
Okay, so 2 last questions. Always 2. There's always 2.
2 away, and you
yeah, exactly. So, if you can go back 15 years ago, what would be the single best piece of advice you would have given yourself?
The best advice 15 years ago?
20?
20 years ago?
15 years, because that's right when you started.
I think it's in the entrepreneurial quest, the most important thing is really around, are you happy every day? So your passion really drives this more than anything else. And we happened to have an exit with Microsoft that was very successful, but we didn't really depend on that. But we were very happy every day coming into work. I think if you're not happy doing what you're doing, then you need to do something else, right? So you should evaluate every day when you wake up, are you happy? And it doesn't have to be starting your own business. I think it can be, you can work for somebody, and if you're happy, that's fine. I think that's more important now looking back 15, 20 years than anything else. Even all the money you'll make, it's fine, but if you're not happy, you know, who cares, right? So I think being happy is more important, and that it involves, that's a very complex answer, right? It involves a lot of things, but I think ultimately that's what drives the perseverance and the willingness for an entrepreneur never to quit. It's because that drive to, you know, be happy the next day, right? They're achieving something.
Okay, and one last question is probably the most important question of all the questions I asked you. You ready for this? So who's your favorite superhero and why?
I knew you were going to ask that question. That's why you stood up behind the chair. My favorite superhero would probably be Batman.
Why?
I happen to like Christian Bale a lot. I think I think Batman has the coolness factor, you know, happens to be pretty wealthy too, although I'm not as wealthy as Christian Bale, I think. But you know, he likes to, in his when he's not fighting crime, he's actually spending a lot of time giving back, right? So I actually like that. I think that, you know, rounds out a person's character. And of all the characters I can think of, if I could be one superhero, it'd probably be Batman.
Okay, great. So I mean, you already sort of told me this answer, and I always ask our speakers beforehand, and yours was easy to find a gift for. Went to Walmart, and I found this little shirt here because you were recently married, right? And you're probably going to be expecting kids soon. So it says, "Always be yourself unless you can be Batman. Then always be Batman." So wait, and then wait, I got another one. So
Barely fits.
because this was only $6, so I gotta get something better than that. So I got you the Batmobile started right on here. So, so thank you very much for coming out, ladies and gentlemen. Duke Chung, thanks for coming out. Okay, thanks.